Part 1. The Ghost in the Family Photo. They say weddings are a time for family, for celebration, for shared joy. But as I stood outside the grand glass doors of the Lexington ballroom, gripping my clutch tighter than I meant to, the only thing I could feel was the familiar chill of being unwelcome. Not by strangers, no, that kind of discomfort has a certain distance to it. This was the kind that's intimate, the kind that looks like love on the surface but feels like rejection underneath. My heels clicked sharply against the marble as I walked in. Alone. Not because I didn't have someone to bring. I could have. But I chose not to. I wanted to walk in exactly as I was. Unshielded. Unapologetic. Undeniably present. And yet the moment I entered, it felt like stepping into a courtroom where I was the defendant and the jury had already reached its verdict. Guilty of being 36, unmarried, successful, and worst of all, unbothered by their disapproval. The heads turned first. Then came the whispers. I didn't have to hear the words to know the rhythm of their judgment. My sister's new in-laws were already scanning me, hands, dress, the conspicuous absence of a ring. One woman leaned toward her companion, eyes never leaving me, and said, loud enough for her voice to dance across the aisle, "Poor thing. Still can't find anyone." I didn't flinch. I've presented at global tech summits where men twice my age tried to talk over me. I've negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts in boardrooms where I was the only woman in the room. But this kind of sting? It's different because it isn't about business. It's about belonging. Vanessa didn't even look at me. Of course not. She was radiant and rehearsed, all teeth and diamonds and orchestral timing. A porcelain bride in a curated fairy tale. Logan, the groom, looked as if he had been sculpted by a country club sculptor, smiling wide for the cameras, flanked by his equally tailored family. And me? I wasn't part of the display. I was the line they had to acknowledge out of obligation, not affection. I could have walked out then. I probably should have, but something in me, something deeper than pride, told me to stay. Not for them, for me. To face every sideways glance and dismissive smirk without flinching. Because for most of my life, I'd been shrinking myself to fit into rooms that never made space for me. This time, I wanted to see what happened if I didn't. But I wasn't prepared for him. The older man at the center table rose slowly. Edward Sinclair. His name alone carried more weight than any surname in that room. Chairman of Sinclair Winchester Industries, a man who reshaped global logistics, and likely the guest of honor. He stood. And then he bowed. A full, formal, deliberate bow directed at me. The room stilled. Even the music seemed to hesitate. Every whisper stopped cold. Every eye turned. Even Vanessa blinked. And I stood there, stunned, watching the most powerful man in the building do what no one in my family ever had. He acknowledged me, not as an afterthought, not as Vanessa's weird older sister who was always working, but as Juliette Vaughn, the woman who built her own name without borrowing anyone else's. Growing up in the Vaughn household was like trying to breathe underwater while Vanessa floated on the surface, arms outstretched, always catching the light. She was the golden one, the darling, the daughter who made everyone smile simply by existing. And I was the question mark, the oddity, the girl who took apart the microwave at 10 just to understand heat conduction, who built her own website at 12, who skipped prom to attend a regional STEM competition. Mom told me once, with a little laugh, "You'll grow out of that tech stuff." She said it while curling Vanessa's hair before homecoming. Vanessa, who had been voted most dateable, and who never once got grounded for staying out past curfew because, unlike me, she didn't question the rules, she adorned them. I learned early that being curious wasn't cute if you were a girl. That ambition wasn't feminine unless it was aimed at becoming desirable. Vanessa was rewarded for her smile. I was tolerated for my silence. I stopped asking them to understand me the day I got my first investor check and Dad thought it was a student loan refund. They didn't mean to ignore me. That's the cruelty of it. It wasn't malicious. It was just invisible. I was invisible until I wasn't, until Edward Sinclair bowed. But back then, back in that moment, I hadn't processed any of it yet. I was just the woman standing in a black dress at the back of a ballroom, watching an entire narrative shift. And it wasn't the validation I remember most. It was the silence. That perfect ringing pause. Where the world finally listened. Part 2, the weight of their silence. It should have been enough. That moment. That impossible, breathtaking, bone-deep moment when the room stopped pretending I didn't exist. When Edward Sinclair, a man whose handshake could change markets, gave me a bow meant for queens and visionaries. But rage doesn't dissolve with applause. It burns quietly, sometimes even brighter under the flicker of recognition. Because what hit me hardest wasn't the applause that followed. It was the why. Why did it take a stranger, a man with no blood relation, no childhood history, no stake in my past, to see what I'd been screaming silently my entire life? Why did it take him to make them look? I stood there smiling on the outside while a wildfire ignited behind my ribs. Vanessa was glaring now, frozen in that panicked half-smile brides wear when something off-script happens. Her eyes narrowed. Her bouquet trembled just slightly in her white-knuckled grip. I could see it. She thought I'd done this on purpose, as if I'd stolen her spotlight out of spite. No, Vanessa. I didn't steal anything. You just never thought I had anything worth seeing. Back at my table, my cousins, once smug with their martinis and questions about my +1, sat rigid. One of them muttered, "Did she really speak in Zurich?" As if I were a Wikipedia page they hadn't bothered to open. And yet, I stayed seated, because I didn't need to prove them wrong. I had already done it, quietly, thoroughly, relentlessly, for the past 10 years. They were just catching up. But I won't lie, I was furious. Furious that it took Edward Sinclair to speak truth into a room full of people who should have already known. Furious that every science fair ribbon, every hacked solution, every startup pitch, every sleepless night debugging code in the middle of winter when the heater wouldn't work, meant nothing to the people who shared my last name. To them, my success wasn't success. It was a sideshow, at best, amusing. At worst, embarrassing. "You always make things about yourself," my mother had said once, years ago, when I tried to explain how lonely it felt to be excluded from Vanessa's second wedding. She didn't mean it cruelly. That's what made it worse. To her, pain was inconvenient, best swept under the rug before the guests arrived. Now she was watching me with that tight, polite smile. Her eyes were glazed with confusion, almost panic, as if she'd just realized her family photo had a crack in the frame. But none of them moved. Not even a step closer. No one said, "Juliet, we're proud." No one whispered, "We had no idea." They just stared. Like I was a foreign object they didn't know how to classify anymore. And rage bloomed deeper, because I had given them so many chances, so many quiet, humble invitations to see me. And they had declined every single one. I remembered every conversation that veered away from my work, every holiday dinner where I sat silently while Vanessa's latest relationship was dissected like a royal engagement. I remembered bringing home my first prototype, hoping Dad would ask how it worked. He never did. He asked if I had brought a date to the product launch. "You know, Jules," he'd said, half laughing, "you really should try to relax. All work and no man." I laughed then, but it hurt. God, it hurt. And I carried that hurt like a secret weight for years. Because it's hard to explain to people how rejection can wear pearls and smile through family dinners. How silence can be more violent than words. But in that ballroom, something shifted. Edward Sinclair didn't just see me. He named me. He named what I had done, not who I was to someone else. Not Juliet the daughter, not Juliet the sister, not Juliet the one who always missed family events because she was busy, but Juliet Vaughn, the woman who changed policy in 3 corporations with one keynote presentation. That one sentence, "Your keynote at the Zurich summit changed how we handle tech transitions," struck me harder than any insult ever had. Because it reminded me I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. I had done something real. And they'd ignored it. So when Edward asked to walk with me, I said yes. Not out of flattery, not out of curiosity, but because I needed air, and because I needed to see what it felt like to walk beside someone who didn't shrink me. Outside, the terrace was quiet. The lights from the ballroom flickered like a distant galaxy, a separate world I no longer belonged to. He spoke carefully, measured. And when he told me what I already knew, that I had altered the course of a multi-million-dollar corporate investment, I didn't gasp, but I did grieve, because the man who knew that about me wasn't my father, wasn't my sister, wasn't even someone I'd worked beside for years. He was a stranger who had bothered to see what my family never did. That kind of clarity? It's like a blade. You don't even feel the cut at first. But later, when the air hits the wound, you bleed. I stood beside Edward, stone still, staring out at the sky, and thought, how much of my life have I wasted trying to make them notice? My mother's voice echoed again. This is a family event, Juliet. Try to blend in, okay? I had blended. I had shrunk. I had minimized myself so often, I forgot what it felt like to stand tall. And that night, I burned with the rage of every daughter who had ever dimmed her brilliance to make her mother more comfortable. Every sister who had bitten her tongue so the favorite child could sparkle uninterrupted. Every woman who learned to translate her worth into something palatable so she wouldn't be called cold or arrogant or worse. Alone. But I wasn't alone, not in the way that mattered. Because for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't angry at myself. I was angry at them. And maybe that was the beginning of freedom. Part 3, the day I stopped shrinking. Something softened in me on that stone terrace beneath the gold-tinted night sky and the murmured hum of a celebration I no longer felt tethered to. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't peace. But it was the beginning of something. Something with edges smooth enough to hold, but sharp enough to cut through years of disbelief. Edward didn't linger long. After sharing his vision for a new initiative, a proposal really, for me to help build something with him from the ground up, he left me with his card and a promise to call Monday. No pressure, no flattery, just respect. Quiet, solid, earned. And that, oddly enough, left me stiller than rage ever could. Because when someone truly sees you, not as a symbol, not as a prop in someone else's play, but as the architect of your own story, your world changes. Even if just a little. Even if just inside. I stood out there alone after he left, breathing in the coolness of a night, untouched by obligation. I wasn't the woman in the black dress anymore, hiding in the shadow of her sister's fairy tale. I was something else now, something whole. And for the first time in years, I thought, maybe I've been enough all along. Hope, I've learned, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. It speaks in the sound of your own heels echoing down a marble floor, unafraid. It appears in a stranger's bow, in the realization that your worth isn't waiting in the next compliment or next approval. It's already here. The rage had scorched the soil, but beneath the burn, something green was pushing through. When I returned to my seat, people shifted. Chairs scraped, conversations dipped. I noticed Gloria, the mother-in-law, flicking her eyes between me and her champagne flute, her jaw set in a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Vanessa. She didn't look at me, but Logan did. Just a glance. Quick. Measured. Almost curious. It wasn't attraction. It was assessment. He was recalculating, reweighing. I wasn't Vanessa's quiet, awkward sister anymore. I wasn't the question mark in the back row. I was someone his uncle had just toasted in front of the entire room. And it hit me then. These people, they only recognize value when it's named by someone with more power than them. I wasn't interested in being validated by that kind of currency anymore. Later, after the clinking glasses and the polite toasts, my mother approached me. I wasn't prepared for how small she looked in that moment, like someone caught in a frame that no longer matched the photo. She tried. She really did. "You looked beautiful tonight," she said softly. I thanked her. I meant it too. But the weight wasn't in the compliment, it was in what came after. When she said they were proud, when she mentioned Zurich, when she finally acknowledged something that had shaped the last decade of my life. And still I couldn't let her off the hook that easily. "Why now?" I asked her. She blinked, confused, caught. "Why are you proud now, Mom?" I kept my voice steady, kind even. "Because someone powerful said I mattered? Or because you finally believe I do?" She didn't answer. She just squeezed my hand, an old gesture, maybe the only one she knew. And I let her. For a moment. Just one. Then I let go. Because I had nothing left to prove. Not to her, not to Dad, not to Vanessa, not to anyone. And that's when the hope settled in my chest for good. Not a dreamy kind of hope. Not the wishful thinking we're sold in greeting cards. But a grounded kind. A quiet, sober, adult hope. The kind that rises when you realize you don't need your family's applause to believe you've done something meaningful. The kind that walks beside you when you leave a party early, not because you weren't invited, but because you were always meant to outgrow it. Vanessa caught up to me before I left. Her tone was defensive, like a mirror shattering in slow motion. "I didn't know Uncle Edward knew you," she said, her voice half pout, half accusation. "You never asked," I said. That stopped her. I could see her trying to gather herself, to summon that old sisterly power she used to wield like a tiara. "That's not fair." "No," I said, it's just accurate." She didn't argue. But her face crumpled, just slightly, as she said the one thing I wasn't expecting. "You always made me feel like I wasn't enough." I tilted my head. "That's funny," I replied, "because you and Mom always made me feel like I was too much." We didn't hug. We didn't cry. There was no movie magic moment of reconciliation. Just honesty. And that was enough. Because sometimes, the most hopeful thing we can do is tell the truth. Even if it doesn't fix anything. Even if it just clears the air enough to breathe. I left the venue with my back straight and my heart quiet. No more shame. No more shrinking. Just me. Juliette Vaughn. I wasn't the wedding guest anymore. I was the woman who left the script. Part 4. The grief they never saw. I didn't cry in the car. I thought I might. I even welcomed the idea. After all, isn't that what we're supposed to do with pain? Crack it open. Let it run down our cheeks so someone, anyone, might ask if we're okay? But the tears never came. Not then. Just silence. Just the hum of my engine and the pale city lights rushing past the window, like stars falling too fast to catch. Because heartbreak doesn't always show up in sobs. Sometimes it wears a calm face. Sometimes it slips in after the storm, when the guests have gone home and the music has stopped, and all that's left is the ache of being misunderstood for so long, you stop trying to explain yourself. I kept thinking about my childhood bedroom, about how I used to lie awake at night, listening to Vanessa laughing downstairs with Mom, both of them in the kitchen, baking or watching TV or gossiping about neighbors. I'd listen, sometimes with a book over my chest pretending I didn't care. But I did. I cared in ways I didn't have words for yet. I wanted someone to knock on my door, to ask me how I was feeling, to say, "Hey Jules, show me what you're building." Not to be impressed, just to be interested. But no one ever did. And somewhere along the way, I convinced myself I didn't need them to. That's how girls like me survive. We build armor from our accomplishments. We wrap ourselves in degrees and patents and keynote invitations. We pretend success can soothe the places where love never fully arrived. But tonight, sitting behind the wheel, parked in front of my apartment long after midnight, that lie started to peel away. Because the truth was, I did want my mother to brag about me. I wanted my father to remember the name of my company without checking LinkedIn. I wanted my sister to call me just because, not because she needed a favor or because she had to invite me to something, but because she missed me. I wanted to be loved the way they so easily loved Vanessa. And I hate that. I hate that I wanted that. Because it makes me feel like a child again. Small, needy, weak. But maybe that's the real heartbreak. Realizing you never stopped being that child. You just got better at hiding her. I sat in the dark, listening to nothing, and felt the full weight of that loneliness. Not the kind that comes from being single. Not the kind that comes from solitude. No, this was a different kind. This was the loneliness of never being chosen by your own family. Of always being the one they were proud of in theory, but never in practice. They used my success like a prop when it was convenient. Juliet's overseas again. Juliet has some tech thing in Switzerland. Juliet's doing well, just too busy to settle down. But when I needed them, when I came home burned out or broken, they didn't know what to say. They didn't even ask. And so I stopped telling them. That's the secret, isn't it? That some of us don't go silent because we're stoic. We go silent because we're exhausted. Because years of being misunderstood wears a person down. And when silence becomes your only safe space, it also becomes your prison. That night, sitting in my car, I realized how long I had been trapped. Not by them, by my own refusal to grieve. Because I thought grieving made it real. That if I said out loud, my family doesn't see me, then it would be true. And I wasn't ready for that. But now it was already too obvious to deny. I had walked into that ballroom carrying all my power, all my independence, all my hard-won identity, and still, the first thing my mother said to me was, "Don't wear anything too businessy." As if being me, fully me, would be a distraction, a threat, a blemish. Even when I was just showing up, I was already too much. And that's what broke me. Not the wedding, not Vanessa's attitude, not the in-laws whispering about my bare left hand. It was that after all this time, after all my building and surviving and shaping my life into something meaningful, they still didn't want to see it. They still didn't want to see me. And here's what no one tells you about heartbreak. Sometimes it isn't loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet click of a front door closing. The soft rustle of a dress being hung back in the closet. The emptiness of brushing your teeth alone, knowing no one will ask how the evening went. That night, I looked at myself in the mirror. No makeup, hair falling loose, my face bare and tired and real. And I said, aloud, just to hear it, I wanted them to love me. It wasn't an accusation, just a truth. One I had run from for years, and when I said it, something broke open inside me. Not in a devastating way, but in a cleansing one. Because that sentence carried decades of ache. And saying it gave it somewhere to go besides my chest. I climbed into bed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't check my email. I didn't scroll. I didn't plan tomorrow. I just lay there, hand on my stomach, feeling my own breath move in and out. And I realized I may never get what I wanted from them. But maybe, just maybe, I could stop needing it. And maybe that is where healing begins. Part 5. The blueprint was mine all along. The morning after the wedding, I woke before the sun. I didn't plan to. My body just knew. There's something strange about waking up after a reckoning. The air feels lighter, but you do not. You're still carrying the weight. The difference is now you know it's yours, and you can set it down if you choose. I made coffee the way I like it, black, no sugar. I stood by the window, watching the light break slowly over the rooftops, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to hurry. No pitch deck waiting, no calendar full of investor calls, no looming need to be impressive. Just me, standing still. I thought about Edward Sinclair and his offer, the way he saw past the packaging into the machinery of who I am. And I realized, not with pride but with clarity, I had earned that moment. Not by chasing recognition, but by refusing to abandon the parts of myself that no one else valued. I built my life with no applause, no cheat codes, no shortcuts, just sleepless nights and quiet determination. And now finally, I had something no one in my family could give or take away: sovereignty. That word kept repeating in my mind like a steady drumbeat. Sovereignty. The freedom to belong to myself. That day, I turned off my phone for a few hours. I walked to the park. I sat on a bench in a plain t-shirt and jeans, unnoticed by everyone, and gloriously so. There's a special kind of peace in not being watched, in living a life that doesn't need to be performed. I thought about what I wanted next. Not what would make me look accomplished, not what would make my mother finally beam at a dinner party, but what I actually wanted. And it was startling how quiet the answer was. I wanted stillness. I wanted space. I wanted to create, not to prove, but to explore. For years, I had mistaken motion for meaning. Constant motion. Constant proving. I ran on the fuel of "I'll show them," but showing them didn't fix anything. It just left me exhausted. The wedding had been a gift, not because it healed anything, but because it made me stop running. It made me see the finish line for what it was, a mirage. There was nothing left to prove. And without that weight, I could finally ask different questions. Not how do I succeed, but how do I feel free? I started journaling again that week, not with bullet points or business goals, with feelings, raw, undiluted feelings. I wrote about the hurt of being overlooked, the joy of building something from scratch, the loneliness of hotel rooms in foreign cities, the thrill of watching code come alive at 3 a.m., the sting of watching my mother's smile never quite reach me, and the surprising realization that I was still proud of who I had become, even without their love. Especially without it. Because now I knew my worth wasn't circumstantial. It wasn't tethered to my last name or how often I showed up in family group chats or whether I had someone's hand to hold in wedding photos. My worth was my own. I decided to meet with Edward, but not from a place of desperation, not to chase legitimacy. I didn't need his platform. I had my own. What I wanted was alignment. He offered me a seat at the table. What I needed to decide was whether that table aligned with the life I was now building, a life that didn't bend for approval. I emailed him. Monday works. Let's talk vision. Not partnership. Not profit margins. Vision. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to fit into someone else's story. I was writing my own. That weekend, I reorganized my apartment. Not out of boredom, but instinct. I took down the family photos I'd kept out of obligation. I boxed them carefully. Not with bitterness, but with intention. I framed a photo from a small robotics competition I had won at 14 instead. I didn't even tell my family I'd won. I hadn't wanted to be teased. But I remember what it felt like. Standing on that cafeteria stage holding a certificate with my name on it, knowing I had done something incredible. That girl deserved a place of honor. I gave her one because she, more than anyone, carried me to where I am. And now, I was walking forward. No longer out of spite. No longer trying to escape their shadow. Just walking. Toward something freer. Toward myself. Part 6, Home at Last. Healing didn't look the way I thought it would. There was no cinematic closure. No teary reunion with my mother. No sudden invitation from Vanessa to go on sisterly brunches or redo the years we'd lost. There was just me. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, planting basil in the windowsill of my kitchen, sunlight streaking across the hardwood floor, and realizing I felt light. Not because everything had been resolved, but because I had stopped waiting for it to be. That was the real turning point. Not the wedding, not the bow, not even Edward Sinclair's offer. It was the moment I finally understood that peace doesn't come from changing other people. It comes from no longer needing them to change in order for you to feel whole. I still saw my family from time to time. Birthdays, holidays, obligatory check-ins. But I no longer arranged myself like furniture to fit the shape of their rooms. I brought the full version of myself, or I didn't come at all. My mother asked once, over Thanksgiving, why I was quieter these days. I almost laughed. But I just said, I'm not quieter. I just don't explain myself anymore. She blinked, smiled uncertainly, and changed the subject. That used to hurt. It didn't now, because I understood something she might never be ready to say out loud. She didn't know how to hold a daughter like me, and that wasn't my failure to carry. Vanessa and I remained cordial, maybe even respectful. The last time we spoke on the phone, she told me she was starting a blog about home decor and lifestyle and being a woman. She hesitated when she said it, like the phrase didn't quite fit her mouth. I told her to go for it, that the world needs more voices, even the curated ones. She didn't ask about my latest project, and I didn't offer, because I had stopped needing her to mirror my life in order for mine to feel real. I no longer needed to be seen to be valid. I had learned to be the witness of my own life, to stand at the edge of my days and say, yes, this is mine and it is enough. The project Edward and I launched took off faster than either of us expected, not because it was flashy, but because it was solid, thoughtful, sustainable, just like I had always worked. But the difference now? I was building from clarity, not compensation, from vision, not validation. One afternoon, months after the wedding, Edward and I were standing on the terrace of our new office space, surveying the city. The skyline shimmered beneath us, all concrete and chaos and possibility. He turned to me and said, "You know, I've met women like you before, but very few have chosen themselves as deeply as you have." And for once, I didn't deflect. I didn't downplay it. I just smiled and said, "Took me long enough." Because it had. It took years of shrinking and striving and swallowing my voice. Years of wondering if being too much was the same thing as being wrong. But I had learned, you can be too much for people who've never met themselves. That doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you're whole in a world that profits off our emptiness. And I was done renting out parts of myself to make others feel comfortable. I was done asking for permission. One evening, I found myself looking at an old photo, me and Vanessa as kids. She's smiling wide, and I'm staring into the camera, serious, already suspicious of how much space I'm allowed to take up. I didn't feel here or angry or even nostalgic. I felt grateful. That girl made it. Despite everything, despite being overlooked, misunderstood, shamed for her sharp edges and louder questions, she made it. She became me, and I was finally becoming her home. That night, I sat by the window again, tea in hand, watching the city soften into dusk. The air was quiet, and so was my heart. I wasn't waiting anymore, not for an apology, not for an invitation, not for applause. I was living, fully, finally, unashamed, unafraid, undone and remade, by myself, for myself. And that, I think, is the kind of healing no one can give you. You have to choose it, again and again, every day, every breath, until you look in the mirror and see not what they failed to love, but what you chose to keep alive. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, like your worth was invisible until someone else said it out loud, this story is for you. Don't forget to subscribe and share this with someone who needs to remember they're enough.